I'm Kirsten D. Samuel, Aftershock Recovery Method coach, and this is my husband, Dave.
Hey.
I always love it when I can bring him back onto a video with us. Over the next few weeks, we're going to talk about, can a marriage survive the discovery of porn use? We get this question a lot. What did we do to survive? And we've told bits and pieces of our story in the past. It's been over 15 years now since things went south really fast. And in this video, we want to talk about what did we do to recognize, first of all, what's the difference between guilt and shame? And what did we each have to do to work through that? Many of you are familiar with Brene Brown. I love how she describes the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt says, I did it. Shame says, I am it.
Right.
You know, as you think about dealing with overcoming your struggle with porn, what was the guilt and what was the shame?
I think the shame was palpable because it was one of these things where I knew I didn't want to do this, but it had been stemming from issues that I had to deal with in my background. And so it was the medication of choice. The problem with the shame was because as a believer, I knew that I shouldn't be doing this. And yet the enemy kept coming back and saying, see, you're not as a believer. You know, if you were a believer, this wouldn't be an issue. And so the shame kept pushing me down. Whereas when the revelation came out and when others got involved, there was no hiding. Working through that, it was like, okay, I owned that. I had to own it. And once I owned it and other people came in to help, then there was the guilt of, yes, I blew it, but the understanding of, no, there's no shame. I had to work at that as it kept coming back. But the shame was not an issue, was not a factor as much as it had been because there was no hiding it at that point. Taking that first step of reaching out and having people come in to help and to open myself up and to be transparent, to say, okay, this is what I have done, but I'm not going to let this define me, was a freeing thing as much as I didn't think it would be.
It was surprisingly for me, the revelation of the struggle that you were having with porn created in me the shame of I am not worthy, along with I don't matter, all the insecurities that I was dealing with when I knew that you were struggling with porn. It was interesting as I look back that the shame came from internalizing that and associating the fact that if I were pretty enough, if I were smart enough, if I were more worthy to be loved, then you wouldn't have been tempted by the porn. And that's the lie in the porn. That twist that the enemy comes in and whispers, well, if you were fill in the blank, really, as a woman, fill in the blank, all of these ifs, all of these little lies and pokes and needles, that was the shame. I had to realize that I was taking these shame statements and making them identity statements. Like Brene Brown said, shame says I am. That's what the enemy wants us to believe. He wants us to stay in shame.
Right.
So in order for us to heal, both of us, we really had to overcome shame.
Honestly, when I look back at that, it didn't have anything to do with you. But that's another lie, too. And we can talk about that at a different time.
That whole thing of guilt versus shame, how important was that for your healing to recognize the difference between guilt and shame?
It was a big step, realizing that shame is not from God. The Holy Spirit comes along and he convicts us of sin.
Right.
But there's not the shame involved with that. There is the guilt to say, hey, you've done this. There is forgiveness and there's restoration, whereas the shame just continues to push you down. The conviction is the good part. The shame is the destructive part.
Yeah. And I found it interesting that with the discovery of your struggle with porn and all the things that it brought up in me with shame, in my shame, I wanted to pour shame onto you. I wanted to deflect it to you. But when I realized the only way I was going to heal was through that forgiveness, that was when the freedom started to come. That was when God could come in and do the work that he needed to do in me. And it wasn't helping you or me when I was trying to push that shame onto you and say, well, you did this. But I had to own my own guilt, saying I was angry, and in my anger I was striking out. And I was wanting to make you hurt as much as I hurt, which wasn't going to solve anything
Right.
for us. It only created more shame in me because I knew I wasn't supposed to be
Yeah.
doing it. And it created more shame in you. When we could work through this with the help of our restoration team, our coaching team, with the help of our counselors,
Right.
and start to separate the struggle that was destroying our marriage from the guilt, the things that we did, that's when I feel like we began that recovery journey.
Once we owned it, you
Yeah.
know, I mean, we both had issues. It's never a one-way street. There's
Right.
always two parts to it. I think once we both owned our piece of it and realized there was work to be done, but there was no shame in that, and we had to do it, then we were able to get down and get the work done. And it wasn't perfect. We didn't do it perfectly. And it was a long process.
Yeah. It was interesting how shame came into our recovery, even the thought of having to go through the recovery process, what you said about, get over the shame of I have to recover. That's just weird. Why would shame come in there? But it's true. We both had to overcome not only the shame of what had been going on, but the shame that we had to recover, which is crazy.
Yeah. It comes down to having safe people, because you have to be vulnerable, you have to be transparent, you have to open yourself up. You can only do that when you feel safe with the people that you're opening up to. And you're not going to open up to everybody. No. To have, for us, that core team that we felt safe with, that we could say, okay, here we are, we're a mess, which then helped reduce the shame.
The more we opened up and the more we allowed our counselors and we allowed this team who were willing to just love us as we were. That was one of the very first times that I realized my value as a person was not in what I did. My value as a person was who God created me to be.
So understanding the difference between guilt and shame is very important. It takes personal responsibility to create the space for the healing. If you're not owning it, if you're not owning your stuff, then you can't get over it. You can't work through it. And that's the first step towards the healing process. Why don't next time we discuss, how we reconnected, because that was a process in of itself.
Yes.
Of how we then started to build bridges back to each other during that time.
So one of the ways, if you feel like you're in this position where you just don't know how to overcome, if this is guilt or if this is shame, I hope that you'll reach out by hopping on over to KirstenDSamuel.com, clicking the blue button. You can select a free Know That You're Worthy session, or you can select a free couples coaching session. So we'll see you next time.